Hey everybody, Troy David Phillips here in Woodbridge, Virginia at Flashback Comics. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that is very, very important to all of you, whether you are longtime collectors or neophyte collectors. Doesn't matter, because you have comic books in your collection. And all of those comic books need the same thing in common. They need to be protected. There are lots of ways to protect your comic books. Real quickly, let me just say that there are companies like CGC that offer a grading service. They evaluate the condition of your comic and they preserve it into a hard plastic casing. It's a proprietary process that they use, which archives your books and keeps them from deteriorating. That's important, but maybe that's a level to which you don't necessarily feel inclined to go. Comic books, for the most part, are inherently self-destructive. They weren't really meant to live for as long as they have, but it is possible to protect and preserve your comic without necessarily archiving it in the CGC process. So, at the very least, you could bag and board your comics. Now, here at Flashback, we sell polypropylene bags and boards. We sell the bags as individuals and then the acid-free treated boards, which protect and preserve the comic by keeping it stiff and upright and protecting the corners from getting dinged. That's a technical term, dinged. You can go upwards from the standard bag and board, which is kind of flimsy, but it's good. It's non-reactive. It won't degrade the color of your comic cover. They don't stick to each other. The next step up from that is Mylar. Mylar comes in different thicknesses. It is more archival, it is less reactive, and it will help to preserve your high-dollar things. Maybe you do have some comics from the early 1970s, the 1960s, possibly even the 1950s or 1940s. Mylar is a great way to protect those things. Again, they come in different thicknesses, 2 mil, 2.5 mil, 3 mil, 4 mil, etc. And that plastic is stiffer and thicker than the polyethylene or polypropylene. I said polyethylene. That is not a material that I recommend. Polyethylene bags are not archival and they are reactive. Maybe you've ever bought comics in a bag and the bags kind of cling together. The bags turn a milky translucence over time. That's polyethylene. That's terrible stuff. I recommend that you take your comics out of that, you throw that stuff away, and put them in something good, at least polypropylene, or move it up to Mylar. There are things that you can do inside the bags and boards to further protect your comics. Now, there is a thing called microchamber paper. It's very, very thin, but it absorbs moisture and pollutants that are found in the air. Microchamber paper is very good and does not have to be changed periodically. I believe the report on the material is that microchamber paper can live inside your comic for 28 years before you have to change it. So once you slip a sheet in, and what I would recommend is that you put a sheet inside the front cover or into the middle of the book, and that should do the trick. It's thin enough that when the bag and the board is sealed, the comic and the paper don't heavily interact with each other. That is to say, the paper doesn't indent into the comic page. Going farther, even still, we've put your comics into bags and boards. Maybe we've put microchamber paper into them. Well, now what? Now you put them into comic book boxes. Long boxes, short boxes. With bags and boards, a short box holds approximately 150 comics. And maybe that is as much floor space as you want to dedicate. The box doesn't stick out very far, and you could stack them on top of each other. There's the long box, which holds more like 250 comics with bags and boards. I recommend not packing the box too tightly. You can compress the comics and press in folds, creases, and indentations, thus degrading and devaluing your comic. So leave them a little bit stiff. My general rule is that if I could flip across the tops of the comics and see the title, then there's not too much in there. Just that much slack is all you really need. Now, what do you do, say, when you've got 100 comics and a long box, and there's still room for 150 things more, and you don't have 150 comics right now? Well, the first thing I'd say is come into the store and buy 150 comics more. But if you can't do that right now, you can turn that box on its end and keep the comics stored flat. They won't stay like that long. It's a bad idea to keep them in stacks for extended periods of time, but for a short term, it's okay to do so. You can also fill that box up with packing paper. Some people that I know use empty shoe boxes to help hold that slack. None of your comics are going to be in these circumstances overly long. I wouldn't recommend permanently storing your comics that way, but again, short term, they should be okay. So, you take your bag, your board, you slide the board into the bag. You put the comic on the slick side of the board. You tape the bag shut. You put the bagged comic into the box. You alphabetize your comics, and then you sit back and you enjoy your collection, which has now been preserved. That's a lot of information, and if you have more questions, by all means, leave them in the comments at the bottom of this video. Send me an email, send me a private message on Facebook. I will be happy to fill in the gaps and tell you more about how to protect and preserve the comic collection that clearly means as much to me as it does to you.